I would like to welcome Richard Forliano, who has been teaching history since 1966. He taught social studies in the Eastchester school system for 40 years, and he has been serving as Eastchester Town Historian since 1988. He is presently working as an historical consultant for public and private school districts and in Westchester and the Bronx. He served as one of the consulting editors of the only full-length book on the history of the town of Eastchester entitled Out of the Wilderness, which I hope some of you, if not all of you, own. It's about the emergence of Eastchester, Tuckahoe, and Bronxville, and it came out in 2014. We also have it here in the library if you'd like to take it out. He has published over 180 newspaper articles on topics of local history and conducted presentations, local tours, and formal and informal oral histories, too numerous to count. And now I give you Richard Forliano. A Tuckahoe History of African Americans.
I did this presentation at the Eastchester Public Library 11 months ago. And every time I do a presentation, I go over it all again, for the audience. And I'm really glad that you guys are here, the people on Zoom. Change the way I do presentations. I used to talk the whole time or get other people to act out rules. I'm going to stop twice and get questions and comments. I want to get through the whole program. And if I can't answer it at that time, we'll do it in the question and answer at the end. We're going to go over the Tuckahoe history. And let me tell you a little bit about Tuckahoe, Eastchester, Bronxville, and historic Eastchester. At one time, up till 1892, Eastchester, and all the way from Scarsdale, which was called Heathcote Manor, all the land between the Bronx and the Hutchinson River, all the way down to the Long Island Sound. Most people don't know that. And I'm passionate about historic preservation, but there's something even more passionate about, what keeps our communities together. And this is one of my favorite topics. So this is going to be a Tuckahoe history of African Americans from colonial times to Martin Luther King's March on Washington. Now, there is a conflict tonight, and it happened on the Historic Preservation Commission is also having a meeting tonight at the same time. And many of the people who are there would be here, but they can watch this. It's going to be taped and they can watch it later on. I dedicate this to my mother and my wife. These are the two reasons why we were able to put this presentation together. I want to tell you a little story about when I was 5 years old. I had just moved up from the Bronx to Pelham, and I was in the backyard in North Pelham, and we were playing Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo. You all know that rhyme? Catch a tiger by the toe. Exactly, and please, this is participant, and I used that terrible word that I've never used since. So we had a two-family house in Pelham. My mother, who I adore, called me up and said, "Richie, I never want you to use that word again." And I never have. And that's important. And my wife, who can't be here because of illness, she's been an inspiration. So I'm dedicating this program to those two. Next. I'm going to call it, Dan, you read, just read for a while.
It is in vain to recall the past unless it has some influence on the future.
Next.
And the truth, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And the truth will set you free.
And this is the truth. I cover everything I do. I cover from multiple perspectives. You'll see this as we go through. Next. Now, the first part is the history of enslaved and free African Americans in Lower Westchester. Up till 1990, I've been teaching in the Eastchester schools, and I had no knowledge of any enslaved people in Westchester. Then go to the next slide. I don't think any of you know who that is. That's Larry. You know Larry, right? A little bit. Yeah. He's a Mount Vernon historian. And I had just 2 years before, I just been appointed Eastchester town historian. And Larry says, "Come to my office. I want to show you something I've discovered from the Eastchester Town records. And what he discovered blew my mind and changed me forever in the way I approach this topic. Up till 10% of the population of Westchester were enslaved people from Africa. Where did he find this? In the Book of the Colored People and the Office of the Poor for Eastchester Town records. We go to the next slide. At one time, as early as the beginning of the 18th century, 10% of the population of Westchester were enslaved people. 12 years later, there were 300 people enslaved. And even after the American Revolution, a war to set men free, there were 740 enslaved people. This blew my mind. Next slide.
Quick question, I'm sorry, Mr.
Yeah.
Forliano. Now, this would be in the town, but from that stretch that you had mentioned
Yes,
earlier,
yeah,
from Heathcote all the way down?
right, but there were only 800 people living in the town. So it was a significant.
No, I'm just trying to understand the area.
Yeah,
It
right.
wasn't the little tiny area that you
No.
just said, okay, I
Well,
understand.
I'm gonna be focusing on Tuckahoe here.
Yes.
Present
Wow,
day
it's
Tuckahoe
fascinating.
and historic Eastchester. Next slide. Without the enslaved, we would have never been able to clear the wilderness. Now, obviously, the only group of all the immigrants who came here against their will were enslaved African Americans. And they were instrumental with the colonists who came here. Now, there were two kinds of communities in Westchester. One are manors. This goes back to the Middle Ages. All the area west of the Bronx River, Phillipsburg Manor, Van Cortlandt Manor, Fordham Manor, where I grew up, Pelham Manor. I grew up in Pelham, not Pelham Manor. So these were like feudal areas, and they even treated their enslaved people worse. Now, we'll get to this, but when you think about it, African American enslaved people came here and they didn't have any say in it. There was a brutal passage here. Now go to the next slide. Next. Oftentimes, they didn't have any say in their own lives. When somebody died, the people who owned them, when they died, their families could be split apart. It was very cool. Now, there's another thing. What happened back then is that in New York City, the enslaved people were mostly women, and the men were farmed out, right? I hate to use that term, to the country, like Westchester. So oftentimes there were people who would run away, get their families together. This was quite true. Next slide. So here's a map. This is Eastchester. The northern border would be Scarsdale. As I said before, it went all the way down here. And this is the first map we have from 1797. So we really know what Eastchester was like. Now, I'll get to how Tuckahoe got involved in this. Next slide. These are houses in Eastchester. This is the oldest house in Eastchester. It goes back to the 1760s. It's on the historic Westchester Preservation. This is the Ward House. And that's what the big meeting is at Village Hall. And right now, the Historic Preservation Commission is going to decide they're moving over a hardship. But this is one of the oldest Revolutionary War homes. Not the only one, but it's important. And this is what it looked like in the inside. Now, if you lived we were not a manor. Every farmer here owned his own land. And the enslaved people were in the same houses. Now, if you were a benevolent person, and there were Quaker families here, like the Franklins, they treated their enslaved people with dignity, but other people did not. Like I say, can you imagine selling one of your children and never seeing him again? That often happened. But there were other people who treated him quite well. But remember this, a horse in your barn or the livestock in the fields had more protection than an enslaved person. But that's important to know. Now, slavery existed all over the world. And actually, the treatment of enslaved people got worse in the 19th century. And this was common all over the place. But it was a problem here. And people did run away. And there were slave rebellions. There was a slave rebellion in 1711 and in 1741. And their punishment, well, it could be hung or they could be burned, but the worst punishment was to be sold to the Caribbean, to Jamaica or Barbados, because they didn't treat their enslaved people as well as they were treated here. And that's almost impossible to believe. We'll go to the next slide.
Where is the Ward House?
It's at the top of Winter Hill Road. Well, who asked that? Oh, it's at the top of Winter Hill Road, where it comes with White Plains Road. You know, and it's an important site. And we can talk about that later, you know. Most of the people who are in Village Hall right now, from the historic preservation, listening to that, they've heard this presentation already, or they wanted to come, but they couldn't be two places at once. That's one of the problems I have as Eastchester Town historian. It's Eastchester, Brownsville, and Tuckahoe. And oftentimes I have to be 3 or 4 places at once. And that's difficult. Bad joke, but next. Well, the other matters there, you can see them on the screen. Next slide.
The perplexing dilemma facing enslaved African Americans in Westchester during the American Revolution.
And this is sad. The American Revolution was a war to set men free. But that was for white men. The enslaved people, and we'll go to the next slide, had to make the American Revolution a war of their own. And they had a crazy dilemma. Next slide.
Let me just get you over to the side here, okay?
You sound like my wife.
Get this over here.
And that's a key, off the record, that's a key to a happy marriage.
Yes.
My wife and I have the same values, we have good sense of humor, but we have no interests. I mean, our interests vary great. Actually, I got criticized by Larry, he said, don't use this picture, this is from the Civil War. But this is what a family looked like with enslaved people. That's Larry Spruill, who I work closely with. Next. Now, when the American Revolution broke out, and Josh, you know about this, right? There was a guy in Virginia, the royal governor, that said, enslaved people, if you fight on our side, we're gonna give you your freedom. And word got out from Virginia to Pennsylvania, right up here. This was the biggest migration of enslaved people up to the Emancipation Proclamation. And you had a choice. If you ran away, and we're us local historians, we're trying to gather together statistics. We're working on it. How many people in Westchester went on the loyalist side? And by the way, the British carried out their promise. At the end of the American Revolution, which, in my opinion, they fortunately lost, the enslaved people got their freedom. But guess what? They couldn't stay here anymore. They had to go to Nova Scotia or Bermuda or some other colony. I'll go to the next slide. And here's a great story. I love telling stories. I'm going to sit down for a minute, which is a little.
And
loud.
Richard, just face toward me just a little bit, like
Okay.
just not totally, but just kind of sideways.
Okay, so they can see me.
Yeah, just diagonal. You could look at your audience, but just so I could hear you.
Okay. Stephen and Edmund Ward owned all the land from White Plains Road all the way over to the Hudson River. Stephen was a revolutionary insurgent. he had possession of 3 enslaved people. But Edmund was a loyalist and had a 300-acre farm. You all know where Simon Golf Course is, Bronxville Manor. And they hated each other. And the hatred got so personal, I'll share it with you. Now, Edmund Moore, who had a big mansion, probably where Simon Country Club is today, eventually got burnt down, owned 6 enslaved people. One of them was this girl named Anna, who was 21 years old. Now, Phoebe and Edmund had 6 sons. And they were in their early 20s to teenagers. Now, just think about this. Stephen has his own brother arrested through the committees of public safety for being a loyalist. So Edmund is in jail, and Phoebe Fowler Ward is stuck on her farm with 6 boys. Now, if you were a girl, do you want to be stuck in a house with 6 adolescent boys? What does she do? She runs away. Now, Marilyn Hill, go to the next slide. Colleague of, she's the founder, one of the founders of the Bronxville Conservancy, did this marvelous job of research and really went into research about Anna Ward down at St. Paul's National Historic Site. That's where Eastchester was founded. But that's not all of her story. Anna Ward shows up in New York City at the end of the war with a 11-month-old baby named Suki. She's put on a ship and she goes to Nova Scotia and she gets her freedom. And we're still trying, we don't know what happened to her, but we have historians who are working on that. Now, Washington wanted his enslaved people back. So actually, the British lost the war, but actually kept their promise with that. And Marilyn was the person that, by the way, I'm an amateur historian. I've been doing it since like 1988. But everything I do, I run through these PhDs like Marilyn Hill and David Osborne. Next slide. Most prominent families in Eastchester had enslaved people. The Wards, they had 9 slaves. I lived, and the families were divided. The Fowlers, the Hunts. We had, I had 6 of the picnics come up to look at the Ward House a year ago, June. And they were fascinating. There's so many great stories here. And as we approach the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, we're looking at the American Revolution through multiple perspectives. You heard Pell
Oh, I'm
Grants?
sorry.
That's the Pelham. And these families were divided. I did my last presentation on that. We had like 175 people at Lyric hearing about different things. I'm going along. Let's go to the next slide so I get back on track. Now, this is the best story. There were Rebecca Turner. How many of you have ever heard of Rebecca Turner? Raise your hand. Josh has. She had 2 parents. They were, I have to check my notes here. Their names were, sorry. See, remember. They were the Franklins, Anna and Nate Franklin. They were the family that owned them were Quakers, and they loved Nate and Anna. So when the American Revolution was over, they said, we want to take care of you. If we let you go, what are you going to do? How are you going to support yourself? So they gave something that some people, it's up to you to decide, better than freedom. They gave money and land. They bought a house. And their daughter, Rebecca Franklin, got married. And before her parents were emancipated, she was given her freedom. And she was married, had a little girl. She was married to a free Black. And this is unbelievable. Born during the American Revolution, 1780, she lives 92 years. She outlives 8 of her 9 children. She was a businesswoman. You know, did some business back then. She took in clothes. She had a farm right near St. Paul's National Historic Site. And then, and she would attend the church, but the church was segregated. African Americans had to go in the balcony. They weren't treated like other people, so she formed her own Sunday school in town. She lives to 1872. Now, Josh, you've heard of Rebecca, because nobody here has. I've talked to people in Mount Vernon. There's a school named after her in Mount Vernon, in elementary school. And nobody knows about it, even people in Mount Vernon. What a great story. And there's so many great stories about people who can rise up and live out, as Martin Luther King said, the true meaning of our creed, that all men are created equal. I've been around Larry Sproul too much. Next slide. Now, let's fast forward to the Civil War, the worst. Just imagine, 30 million people, 600,000 died. Immediately, and afterwards, they die of their wounds. Now, the worst riot in American history wasn't the attack on Washington. 120 people died after Gettysburg in New York City, the New York City draft riots. What happened is that we had a large-scale Irish immigration, which I'll talk about later. The Irish were being paid money to fight in the Civil War. And then all of a sudden after Gettysburg, when 50,000 people died in 3 days, on a hot July day, they rioted in New York City. They burnt down an orphanage that had Black kids. Now, what saved it were volunteer Irish firemen, so you can't stereotype a whole race. No, I even have a better story. Next. There's a guy named William Sisselton. None of you ever heard of him, but it was 1998. I'm sitting in my classroom. It's June. I don't know if your son was in that class. What year did he graduate?
83 was born in 1987.
So that was different. This little girl, Stephanie Sedino, comes in and says, Mr. Forliano, I have a diary from the Civil War. My great-great-grandfather fought in the Civil War. And I said, thank you, Stephanie, for giving me this bunch of Xeroxes from the Civil War. And I said, so I had to go up to New York State Historical Society, and all of a sudden my eyes pop out. This guy, William Sisselton, who lived in Mount Vernon, was a volunteer, fought in the Mexican War, and he wrote about the Civil War. And what he wrote, you're not going to believe the next slide. Go to the next one. There's a famous battle, the Battle of Petersburg. It was in June 30th, 1864. There was a plan that could have ended the war 9 months earlier. The plan was, in Petersburg was the railroad center of the Confederacy. The plan was to dig a hole into Petersburg and send some African-American troops in. Well, they had a council of war. You know, you can't always trust generals. And the colored troops are supposed to go, that's what they called them back then, it's not my term, go through first. Well, they had a council of war, and this drunken idiot named Ledley said, well, we're really sending the colored troops, and that's gonna get the Confederates even madder. So send my troops in. Ledley goes off, gets drunk, doesn't go through with his troops, and doesn't give them scaling ladders. There's this big crater in Petersburg. All of a sudden, the rebels run away, and then all of a sudden, there's no way these guys can get out. And then the colored troops get in. So after the war, and this is the danger of generals, they want to blame it on somebody. Guess who they blame it on? The colored troops. But guess who writes in this diary? And this gives me goosebumps to this day. Louis, will you read what he wrote in the diary?
It has been asserted by military and civilians that Negroes will not fight, having neither the courage nor the endurance. Every man who witnessed the charge of the colored troops on the 30th of July, 1864 at Petersburg, that no body of men could have fought more valiantly or done better.
Who do you believe, the generals or William Sisselton? Now, the story even gets back, you can't believe it. Next slide. Bob Semino has an impeccable reputation. He's coach of the Mount Vernon basketball team. And what?
It says direct descent.
He's a direct descendant of William Sisselton. That was his niece that gave me that diary.
Wow.
And I've talked to Mary Marvin, and she does volunteer work for these basketball players. Now, a lot of these basketball coaches today are like Civil War generals. They're out there, whatever they are. But Bob Semino is beloved by everyone. He was coach of the year. I think that's a great story. And that's what the wonderful thing about history. They're good and bad. Then there are people who rise above what they're doing. So I think that's a great story. Next.
There was a movie called Glory. I was wondering if the famous slide was based on that.
That was a great movie. Glory.
Cold Mountain is based on.
Oh,
It was
okay.
a great movie with Renee Zellweger, and I think who, some English guy, Cold Mountain. Glory is based on The Colored Truth. That's my favorite movie. of all
It's
time.
wonderful, wonderful.
Glory. It's very accurate. It's rated as one of the top 15 movies, accurate movies. A lot of Hollywood was total fiction, some isn't. Okay, any questions about anything I've gone over so far, or comments? We'll keep on going.
This is fantastic.
Well, it makes me feel good. If wherever my mother is, it makes her feel good too.
This gives me connections that I need.
Yeah, and that's what history's, I thought if you study history, God teaches history in English. It gives you a passage, it tells you who you are, where we came from. And there's more that, in this day and age, that we have in common that separates us. But, we've gone through other times like we're going through now. 1800, Civil War, the period at the beginning of the 20th century, after World War I. So hopefully we can get through it, but we're being tested again. And we have to emphasize what brings us together, not what separates us. Now, after we're gonna get to the second part. Ethnic and racial tensions in the 20th century. Next. Here's some statistics. And we're gonna talk a little bit about the Irish, because I don't want to throw the Irish under the bus. The year is 1850. You all know about the Irish potato famine. 1 million of the 8 million died of starvation. There was no reason why one person had to die. Irish was one of the richest agricultural places in the world, but the British passed drastically horrible laws. 2 million of the Irish left and went all around the world. They came. Ever see the movie Gangs of New York?
Yes.
It was brutal in New York City, but it was different in Tuckahoe. Now I'm talking about Tuckahoe. Why? The Irish came here to work in the quarries. They had a job. The stonecutters, like the Bellews, there's a whole bunch of stonecutters were extremely affluent. The quarrymen, and it was backbreaking work, had jobs. They had a one-room schoolhouse in Waverly Square. They had a job. They had a way out. And within 40 years, the Irish took over Eastchester politics. And I had 4 godparents, 3 of them were Irish. So I never knew that there was tension between the Irish and the Italians. But when I did my histories with Al DePippo, he said, "Didn't you know about this?" I had no clue. And that was only 10 years ago. So 1850, let's see, in 1900, the Irish made up 36% of the population. The Italians, now this is incorrect. They said there were only 200 Italians in Eastchester. And the reason is there were a lot of Italians who lived in hotels all over the place, boarding houses. They just weren't counted. And some of them were illegal immigrants. Now, the Irish, only 10% went back. The Italians, up to 50% went back. Why didn't the Irish go back? They had nothing to go back to. Ireland was a wasteland. But the Italians came here. Some came here because they loved it here. Other ones came, they went back to their families. So I just want to mention that, now, as badly as the African Americans were being treated, what the English did to the Irish, is considered to be by some people genocide. I just want to mention that African Americans aren't the only ones to suffer in American history.
Irish no need to apply.
But it didn't happen in Eastchester because there were jobs. There were no, but it happened in New York City. And it was interesting. And within 40 years, the Irish took over, Eastchester politics, but they weren't really fully welcoming to the people who spoke a different language. And weren't real, and in their opinion. But we'll get, this is very, I'm just giving you the overall picture of what happened, not giving you all the details. And that's not all the Irish, it's important not to stereotype. Next slide. Oh, I already mentioned, go next. Like that. It's really early. These are the statistics, we can skip that. Oh, serious tensions existed. Now, this is a picture of the Immaculate Conception Church. It was built in 1911. Its original site was where EVAC is now in Waverly Square. They moved it here with mostly German and Irish Catholics. Now, Italians in the old church weren't comfortable. First of all, and generous of Pope Foundation go into it, the way the Irish practiced Catholicism was very different from the Italians. And they weren't comfortable confessing to an Irish priest who didn't understand their language. They also weren't comfortable having to be in the basement. This is not the new Immaculate Conception, this is the old Immaculate Conception. So the Archdiocese did a very good thing all over the country. They set up separate churches for different ethnic groups. So that's at a quarter-mile away. The same year that Immaculate Conception opened up, the grand opening, the Assumption Church opened up. There was an Italian-speaking church, and everything was done in Italian. Now, in 1983, the two churches combined. But you talk to the old timers, there was real tension between the Irish and the Italians. Now, in 1911, there were almost no African Americans here. They all left Eastchester. Some remained in the new city of Mount Vernon from 1850. I'm giving you guys a lot of dates. That's why people think there's too many dates. But from 1850 to 1892, Mount Vernon was a village in the town of Eastchester. New York City is annexing large portions. Mount Vernon says, hey, we don't want to become part of New York City. We'll become our own separate city. They went from 1,400 people in 1853 to 14,000. So now Eastchester becomes what it is today. Mount Vernon becomes a separate city, but it was really part of the town. And the Assumption Church, how did they build the Assumption Church? On Saturday nights and Sundays, the Italian quarry workers would go down to the quarry on Marble Dam Road, and with their own hands, they put this together. I think that's a great story. I was at the 2011 Assumption Church had its 100th anniversary. What a great story. Next slide. Now, what about the Italian? I love this book.
Oh, it's wonderful.
I don't like the
Fantastic.
second book as much.
This is a great, this is
one
great.
is great. She won the Pulitzer Prize. And she told, in the 1920s, let's go to the next slide. It's a great book to read.
She's a great writer.
According to the census, there were 56 African Americans living in the town. 10 years later, there were 560. what happened? Something called the Great Migration. Something horrible was happening in the South. First of all, machines were replacing sharecroppers. But it was a horrible movie. The worst movie ever, in my opinion. I guess I'm Birth of a Nation. And it eulogized the Ku Klux Klan. And that started a revival of the Klan in the 1920s. Let's go to the next slide. This is a book I read in college. The intolerance of these days took many forms, almost inevitably to the form of an ugly flare-up against the Negro, the Jew, and the Roman Catholic. This is the Klan marching down Pennsylvania Avenue in 1924. It's scary. Now, did it come to Tuckahoe? The answer is yes. Go to the next slide. This is an article from the newspaper. There was African American who got arrested for causing a disturbance. A policeman, I'm not going to mention his name, broke his jaw. Maybe he gave him a hard time. When the tensions ran high, the man was taken to Lawrence Hospital and a shot rang out. You know where the General Pope Foundation is? That was Village Hall. And Alan Simpson went to the mayor, he's the police chief. We need more troops. It's going to be a race riot here. It didn't happen, but it almost happened. Now, all around the country, there was a revival of the Klan. What happened in Tuckahoe? Something beautiful. It never, that tension that persisted, all the lynching to Jim Crow, the revival of the Klan, it never happened. And I'm going to give you 6 reasons why. By the way, when I was writing Out of the Wilderness, we had a great editor. And I said, her name was Eloise Morgan. I was an associate editor. I want to write about this. She said, you're only writing about 1929. You can't write about. If I had to write the book all over again, I would write another chapter. But I never got to write. I'm putting them. There's a publication we want to put it on the internet called Eastchester Neighbor. So I'm writing what I didn't put in Out of the Wilderness in that. Next slide. Want to read that for me?
The village of Tuckahoe was not exempt from racism, but Tuckahoe was able to maintain an environment of coexistence in a time of great racial and ethnic hostility.
I got this. Look at this picture. There are Italian kids and African American kids in the well baby. I think that's a beautiful
It
picture.
is a beautiful picture.
Next slide.
Do you know what the year is, Richard?
Yeah, that's 1930. Now, what was happening is the Family Consultation Service had 12 boxes of its records. I got these pictures from that. And to me, this is and we have by the way, we have a great history. I work closely with Nick Zano and Ray Gessel. Ray's the Toronto historian, and Nick is unbelievable. We have thousands of pictures that tell what really happened. Next slide. Why did the village of Tuckahoe need to dealing with racial and ethnic conflict that divided most other African American communities? I'm going to go over 6 possible reasons, and I'm going to ask you to think of what you think are the most important. Next. This is a picture of Main Street in World War I. Two. Look, you have the veterans from World War I. You have Italian kids, African American kids, African kids. This is a wonderful thing about Columbus Avenue and Main Street. There are no rules for separate neighborhoods. So whether you like it or not, people were forced, and most people like it, were forced to live together. The second reason, which I'm prejudiced because I'm a lifetime teacher. Next, Tuckahoe High School. Now, we just figure this one out. Eastchester, Waverly School was the high school for Eastchester and Tuckahoe. And then Eastchester decides to build their own high school in 1927. And they did an incredibly, I don't know if it's malicious or not, but they wouldn't let anybody from Tuckahoe in their school. They said, you got to find another place to go. So for 2 years, Tuckahoe students were without a place to go. So they could go to A.B. Davis, in Mount Vernon, which is now Mount Vernon High School, or Roosevelt. Well, I have plenty of stories to tell about that. So Tuckahoe, I'm gonna test your history. June 1929, Tuckahoe passes $1 billion bond issue. 20 is prosperity. What happened in late October of 1929? What happened?
Stock market crash.
So Tuckahoe has $1 million high school. And they don't know how they're gonna pay for it. But the unstated mission statement, we talked to the old timers like Annie Carapella, who's not here anymore. They said, we got a great education. I have plenty of stories to tell you about what they said. And the mission was to Americanize people who were here. It didn't matter if you could come up from the South, you would come from Italy, or you would come from Ireland. So the mission statement of the Tuckahoe School, by the way, Eastchester, where I taught, never had a mission statement. We didn't have a superintendent. We kept on doing things like we did in 1929. We were doing that as late as 1980. So when Danny, when I had to buy a house, and I love the kids I taught in Eastchester. And I said, I want to go. I bought a house in Chester Heights. I told my wife, I want my kids to know something about cultural diversity. And it wasn't always smooth. I wasn't to kill my son Tommy sometimes, but I'm gonna give you a proud one. And he's a great guy. I love my son Rick. But one time he went over to Hastings, went over to Royal Gardner and another kid who was a great basketball player. So he goes into the supermarket and he walks in fine. But he wouldn't let Royal and his other kid, the other kid played Division I basketball because they were black. So sometimes Tom was an emotional guy. He goes up to the owner of the store. Why are you letting those guys in? Because they're black, or you can let them in. So I was, that's a moment I was proud of Tom. Dang it. Next slide. So that's Tuckahoe High School. Houses of worship. The Assumption Church had a homework center. Didn't matter if my son's mother was Jewish, or my son-in-law was Jewish. She said she spent more time in the Assumption Church than she did in the synagogue. By the way, Tuckahoe had the first synagogue in, I just checked it out when I was preparing my notes. 1998, they moved out. It really started in 1945, Genesis place. And then there's the Shiloh Baptist Church. Now, I don't know what, the original Shiloh Baptist Church didn't meet here, and I was talking to you guys before. I love coming over. I was a failure in college basketball, failure in college football. I was better in basketball. And I used to play basketball with Jimmy Murray and Neil Ice. They never tried to beat me up. When I go to Mary Shell and Mount Vernon, I would come home with, I was lucky to come home alive. Next. This is a Genesis Hebrew Center. It was the, that existed from 1945. And I do a lot on diversity. I talked about the Italians, the Irish, and Presbyterians, and the African Americans. I get to get to Jewish people, the Asian, and the whole thing. Diversity is a great theme that I love to work on. Next. Now, this is another good story. Benevolent social services. And Nick and I we're working together. This is right in Depot Square. A woman, go to the next slide. This is Amy Dusenberry. She's the overseer of the poor. The overseer of the poor is a title that goes back to colonial time. In 1926, Amy reported, and she was she represents the best in some of the elite things. She was a true public servant. She reported that in 1926, there were 8 families that needed public assistance. 6 years later, there are 1,000 families that need public assistance during the Depression. But she did it differently. She was a public welfare officer. So, Danny, you're out of work, and you're ashamed. You go up and you meet Miss Dusenberry, and she says, Danny, here's a check. go over next door to the charity. And she's gonna give you more money, but I don't want to see you back here in a year getting a check. And it worked. To an extent, because Tuckahoe made it through the Depression. It's a great story, with a great movie, Cinderella Man. Russell Crowe, anybody ever see that movie? Yes. And you watch it, because he's given a welfare check, and then after he becomes heavyweight champion of the world, he goes back and pays back the welfare check. But it's a true story. Next slide. This is gonna blow your mind. I took this picture with a guy named Vince Bellew. Robert Bellew is a saint. Vince, who you see in the center, was head of the Department of Recreation. He, the first person confirmed, him and Madeline Schaefer, I recall about the other guy, were the first two confirmed at the Immaculate Conception Church. He volunteers to fight in World War II. He goes off to fight, and here he is. He acts as a physical therapist. Anybody know who that is? Joe Lewis. How did you know that?
Look at his face, look at his eyes.
I know.
I use this picture and I'm talking to my friend, a teacher from Brownsville. Says, do you know who that is? I said, I have no clue.
Brown bomber.
The Brown Bomber, who fought Max Schmeling.
Right.
I think it's a great story, but World War II, and also you have the Immaculate Conception Church. We didn't have a parochial school at the Immaculate Conception Church till 1932. So Irish kids and Italian kids had to go, and you're not gonna hate your grandkids, then they go off to fight in war. So that tension that existed between the Irish and the Italians, when I went to school in the 50s and 60s, we would make jokes about each other. But before World War II, they were jokes, they were serious. There were families that were disowned, an Italian married an Irish, they were dead. You know, it's good to understand that prejudice exists all over. Next slide. Oh, I love this. This is in the north wall of Waverly, and this is one of my favorite people. I don't think we ever heard of him, Jack Beccarelli. He grew up on Columbus Avenue, and some way in the process, he moved to Eastchester. He's the first person to get a scholarship to Michigan State. He plays 1 year. He says, I have to go home and support my family. Becomes a heavyweight boxer. He gets 15, I forgot the number of TKOs. Then he hurts his shoulder. He then, when he hears about work, he opens the Oak Ridge Bar, which is Mickey Spillane's today. When the war breaks out, he was hard of hearing. He lies, he had some disability he didn't have to fight, shoulder or hearing. He then becomes a hero. This is him during World War II. So we have some heroes here. But when you hear my things, I can tell you stories about people who aren't of the caliber of the ones I'm talking about here. But these are all great stories. Last slide on this. Oh. How many have heard of the Tuskegee Airmen? This is Captain Edwin Woodward. This is, and who was that guy? Anybody know who that is?
Robert Baird.
Yeah. So Edwin Woodward comes and he says, look, my kids don't want anything to do with this replica of a statue we have from World War II. I'm gonna give this to Tuckahoe. And he says something, I grew up in Tuckahoe. I didn't know what prejudice was till I got in the military. I think that's pretty neat. But I'm not gonna give Tuckahoe a free pass. The next story, I usually have David Fuller would be here, he would tell the story, and John Costanza told it. Again, I couldn't get a hold of him, dealing with my wife's health condition. Next,
I do want to mention that you can actually see this statue. It's in the village hall. It's in the center case where our binders are. So it was donated to us. So just want to let you know, next time you're up there, take a look.
Next slide. And then there's Milt Gibbon. Milt Gibbon started the police athletic league. What happened was it was.
Was he also a man?
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that. Thank you for mentioning it. Milt, there were two boys who they wanted to put away. And the mother came to Milt and said, I'm probably oversimplifying the story, can you save my boy? So he went to Village Hall, up to General Hope Foundation. He started the police athletic league. Started, these things. When it was very successful. When World War II broke out, Look magazine came to interview him. He said, why isn't there any juvenile delinquency in Tuckahoe? This is a depression. And Mel, he went from being a great policeman, and I want to tell you about Alice White. He said, I started the police athletic league. That's why there's no juvenile delinquency in Tuckahoe. And it went all over the national publication. Then I told that to Alice White, which said, the reason why, and anybody who grew up on Main Street, that's not why, because if you stepped out of line, you had a whole village that would come on top of your head. I believe Alice more, and he was he was a decent mayor and a great policeman. But we see this with politicians, they move, not Luigi, you're exempt from this. Yeah, you're exempt from this. Oh,
Wait, what about Josh?
No, he's a Democrat.
Now, I could vouch, growing up in Tuckahoe, if you did something wrong, and 10 minutes later, by the time you got home, your parents heard about it. There was our little name, right?
I'm
Just
only kidding about Chuck, but I think they're
Yeah.
great stories. Next,
very good.
then Al Mariani, you have this book in the library, and I called him up in North Carolina, and he said, growing up on Columbus's Manor was great. I'm gonna ask somebody to read this. You can all hear me, right? Okay, next. My wife yells at me too loud.
What made Tuckahoe unique? Was it cultural diversity?
Oh, I screwed up the spelling there. I'm sorry. Before the term became popular. Go ahead. Tuckahoe.
Before the term became popular, Tuckahoe was nothing but Italians, Irish, and Polish Jews. Growing up in Tuckahoe, 1930s to the mid 1960s, and having very little matter. Having friends and loved ones, having friends. Religion is very important. Some people think churches were. Oh, right, Saturday mornings, temples were filled to capacity.
But no one feared walking away at night.
Here, walks.
Now, the nice thing about teaching in Eastchester is that school districts don't follow village lines. About 20% of the kids, I don't know the access in Tuckahoe, the other in the north end of Eastchester. But go to the next slide.
Mhm.
And you can read this, you don't have to, this is from the book. And this is a quote I got from him when I called Fred down in North Carolina. Next slide. Now, let me tell you the story of Henry Norman. Do you know Henry Norman? You've heard of him, the first black police chief. Well, I had John Costanza. I said, John, and I tried to contact him, but I just got too busy with my wife's illness. When John came to Eastchester, I made a presentation, and this is what he said. And I was so happy, it was coming from him, not from me. I gave an oral history that Henry Norman did. I said, John, write about your recollection. And what he said really inspired me. He said, I served for 2 years as a policeman under Henry Norman. And he was a fantastic police chief. And he would have gone a long way in the state, but the people upstate wouldn't give him the same opportunity because he was black. I thought that was very moving. So I covered it with, now David should have been here. David Fuller, he was the last person. He's over, in Village Hall, talking about the war.
And I just wanted to mention too, Richard, that we have some of this on our Facebook page, the Tuckahoe History Committee. About what Richard talked about, Shiloh Baptist, Henry Norman, if you want to go on there too, to follow up with this program.
Now, in the oral history, Henry said it was much harder on his kids. Being the son of a police chief, because they were held to a higher standard. I don't know if you mentioned that. And I'm just going over Henry, we can skip the next two slides. These are all things about what he wrote in his oral history. Next. 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 Oh. I just quote Martin Luther King. I have a dream. Would you read somebody read the Henry Norman's quote from his oral history?
The top, I have a dream.
No, the second one.
I would like my grandchildren to feel that the color of their skin would have nothing to do with how they care.
How far they could go.
to-
I
His
think,
grandson lives in 133 Sagamore.
I think, so, again, when we do these presentations, what brings us together, we're not separate. We don't want to sugarcoat what happened, but we don't want to blame what's happening now on the path. We have to look at it in reality, right? Next slide. Now, on August 28th, 1963, the day before was supposed to be a United States mix up. We thought this was on Monday night, so we can't be, he's like me, can't be in two places at once. He was at Martin Luther King's march on Martin. And then he told me how moving it was for him. Next. That's, and I'm gonna read this. The role of the journalist is to keep the government honest. The role of the historian is to keep the journalist honest. And your role is to keep the historian honest. Because even historians can color the truth. And the really good ones don't do that. Am I a really good one? I need to sleep well. Tell me I'm a really good historian. And these are the people that all contribute. Last slide. These are all the people that contributed, and this is ongoing, but thank you.